This video will deal with competency and look at the competency movement. Competency is an approach that assesses the efficiency and effectiveness of job performance. It looks at the ability of the worker or the operator to perform the function efficiently and effectively. In other words, it's looking at the worker's overall performance, looking at how the worker approaches the task, how the worker deals with the issues, and if a problem arises, the ability of the worker or the operator to deal with the problem and fix it and get the process running again, running smoothly. Competency can apply to individuals, employees and students who possess the right set of skills, knowledge and behaviours to perform a job satisfactorily. In other words, competency embraces not just dexterity and the ability to work with their hands, but it also looks at the knowledge they have of the background to the job and what's involved in the job, and they have a capacity to look critically at the processes and look for improvements. And also they have the ability to maintain the workflow in the event of some problem, as I mentioned in the previous slide. So it's the ability of the person to perform the function satisfactorily. That's a measure of their competence. It's a set of criteria that determines an individual's suitability for a job. All jobs require certain skills and knowledge. It's the case that whatever job we think of, there are some skills, some knowledge, some attitudes that are required to enable the operator to function within that role. They must be adjusted to what they're doing. They must have a purpose. They must be able to concentrate on their function and perform it efficiently and effectively. Competencies, they've gained attention in recent years. They've come to the fore in recent years. In the past, it was assumed that workers would acquire competency, would acquire the skills necessary to efficiently perform their duties. They would acquire these over time and by observation, which is still true. That is still the case. But there was no great emphasis on the need for competencies at the start. Competencies were almost second class compared to knowledge. So people who arrived in work with knowledge, who had been perhaps to college or to university, they had a higher status. At least that's the way it appeared in the past. Competencies were not properly assessed, they weren't looked at, they weren't properly considered. Now there's greater understanding of the need for competencies and the need for employee development so as to enhance productivity. So workers now are praised for their competencies. Now other videos will look at qualifications in competencies which have now come into existence, again recognizing the increasing status of the role of competencies in the workplace. And it's also the case that there's a greater understanding amongst employers and governments of the importance of competencies. After all, we want products made. We want them made efficiently and effectively. We want the workers to focus in on the product, look at the quality of the product and produce it efficiently, and to look critically at the whole process to see if they can make recommendations for improvements. So competencies are very important. In the past there was an emphasis on the need for knowledge. Now we recognize that competencies as well as knowledge are important. Competencies are widely used in organizations, and effectively implemented by linking individual performance to business goals. So when a business sets out its strategic plan and states what it wants to do in the long run, let's say in the next 5 or 10 years or whatever, it must also look at the ability of the workforce to deliver what has been planned. And the ability of the workforce is a measure of the competency within the workforce. Organizations use a defined set of competencies for specific job roles. Doing so ensures that the organization select employees that meet the organization's aims and are able to contribute to business growth. It's important that the business understands the critical role of competencies. Specific jobs need workers who are capable of delivering that task. That means the workers must have the competencies, they must have the skills, the abilities to do the task. Now, this could be working on a spreadsheet, or it could be making something out of metal or a piece of wood, or it depends on the task, but it depends also on the ability of the person to be able to perform that function efficiently. And clearly the efficiency of the organization is just, in a sense, the summation of all of the efficiencies of the workforce. So it's important that organizations have suitable employees with the right skills necessary to complete the tasks. Now, workplace competencies are mainly of two types. Technical competencies, these require specialist knowledge and skills to perform the job role. Competencies are job related and usually require advanced competencies in specific fields. For example, in accountancy, in law, in software development and in engineering. It could be in woodwork, it could be in some craft occupation, it could be in cookery or hotel management. It's having the competency, having the technical competency, knowing how the organization works, knowing how the technical aspects of the work are delivered and what's involved, and ensuring that there is a continuous flow and a continuous smooth transition from, if you like, raw materials to final product. And that could be, as I said earlier, applied to hotel workers. The customers, the clients come in the front door and they have to have a good experience, and when they leave they will promote the reputation of the business. So it applies across the whole spectrum of industry. So technical competency is the ability to do the job and know about the job, know how to keep it running, how to fix it if it goes wrong, what's permissible and what's not permissible. There's also behavioural competency. This is a more generic behavioural situation. Generic in the sense it's widespread. It's skills. It's people having skill, being able to perform basic skills, reading, writing, arithmetic, but also having basic skills in the sense of understanding relationships between people, having knowledge and attitude, having the abilities expected in all the job roles, being polite, being courteous, being knowledgeable, being helpful, and finding these attributes easy to deliver. That's their competency, that's their ability. All employees should be competent in these areas. For example, they should be able to work in teams, they should be able to cooperate, they should have good communication skills, good written skills and good spoken skills. And they should have good people skills. They should be pleasant and polite and affable. Now, assessing competencies. Well, there are many ways an organisation can use competencies to assess employee development. So, competencies can be assessed by the organisation, but also the organisation can use competencies, can use skills to assess people. It's a two-way thing. So on the one hand, they are able to promote competencies within the organization, and on the other hand, the organization, the workers, have the competencies and are able to use those competencies to further enhance competencies elsewhere in the organization. So it's a two-way process. So we start with the interview process. Now, the interviewer must have the competency to conduct the interview, but also the interviewee must have the competency to understand the nature of the task, what's required of them, and so on. It could be the use of psychometric testing in, let's say, an interview situation to find out what the competencies of the person truly are. It's one thing for a person to say they can do the job and they can understand the technicalities of the job, but it's another thing to prove it. So sometimes companies may resort to psychometric testing. It could be the company might use an assessment centre. It depends on the nature of the job and the importance of the job. The more senior the job is, the more the company may refer the situation to an assessment centre who will make some assessment of the person's competency. There could also be skills audits, trying to check what skills the person have got, talk to the individual and see what skills they've got, and try and codify these and see if it matches up to the requirements of the organisation. Self-assessments tend to be quite weak because people, generally speaking, are quite generous towards themselves, particularly if they want the job. Personal appraisals, it could be the organisation does an appraisal on the person, an interview, which is very structured and deals with, let's say, stated skills from the past and looking at the changes over, let's say, a 1 year period, looking to see what skills have been updated and how well the person is adjusting to changes in the organisation or changes in the product range or whatever's happened within the organisation, seeing what the adjustments are and looking at what skills the operator or the employee has currently as compared to, let's say, in the past. So it could be a personal appraisal. Now, the use of competencies benefits organisations. As I said, in recruitment and selection, the one we've just been looking at, clearly there's a case for to assess competencies. The organisation must try to do that at the outset, but also, as I said, it's a two-way street. The employee or the potential employee is also assessing the overall competency of the organisation. Is this an organisation that they want to work for? Will the organisation exist in a year's time? Does it have good management, a good reputation? So competencies pervade the whole area. But training and development can be used to try and improve competencies. When workers are employed, when the company has employees on board, they may attempt to improve the quality of the competencies of the workers by having training and development programs. It may be once a month they have a day to polish some skills, or they may actually base promotion on the attainment of certain skills. It could be performance management. It could be that the management is based on the performance, who works best and how they've managed to achieve what they have, and what problems were encountered, and how the employees or the local managers, how did they deal with it? How did a line manager deal with a major issue on the line? Did he or she manage to keep the line running, or was that a practical proposition? Perhaps it's not. Perhaps there was a major breakdown, but in which case the line manager was able to restructure the workforce to do something else in the time it was down, or something of this nature. Looking at the performance management, looking at the management and trying to assess the management's competencies to manage. Career paths can be based on competencies. clearly it's the case that the more competent a person is, the more skillful a person is, the better chances they have in life. So the government, for example, would advocate that we continuously try to acquire more skills, more competencies, to make ourselves more marketable, more employable. In terms of recruitment and selection, the use of interviews and psychometric testing to screen candidates and assess capability to perform the job role. So to try and make sure that employees are competent, the management will obviously engage in the routine procedures of recruitment, application forms and assessment and so on. But they may depends on the type of job, they may engage in quite an extensive interview process. But they may also ask for psychometric testing. These are tests developed by psychologists over a long period of time, which will give an insight into the person's ability to, let's say, work with numbers or reason logically and understand particular situations. And so it gives an insight into the person's ability. It's not precise, but it's a pointer, and the issues arising out of the psychometric test could be discussed in the interview. Job description clearly display job requirements and desired competencies. Obviously, it's important for the organisation to clearly state in any job advertisement what exactly they're looking for, what sort of person they're looking for, what are the, if you like, the technical competencies we saw earlier, and the more generic competencies. Technical in terms of doing the specific job. If they're looking for an accountant or an accounts assistant, they must specify what they expect the person to be able to do. Plus, they can state that the person should be a good timekeeper, should be good at working in teams and working in group situations and so on. So it's clear that the job description should specify what competencies precisely the organisation wants. This will waste time. It'll prevent the waste of time, because people applying for the job will look at what's required and think they've got those competencies or they haven't. And if they haven't, presumably they won't apply. So it doesn't waste time on the applicant side and also on the organisation side. So a clear statement of the required competencies is important. As I said, it saves time and costs, and it makes sure that the people who are applying for the particular jobs have got the competencies. At least in their own assessment, they've got the competencies to do the job. So it's a more efficient way, stated clearly in the job specification. Now, training and development. Well, the development of employees' skill levels. Well, training is offered to develop and to plug the gaps in competencies. It's not trying to develop gaps, as I think this slide suggests, but it develops and plugs. It fixes any gaps in competencies. Sometimes workers can do a range of tasks, required tasks, and sometimes there may be just a weakness within that whole set of skills, just perhaps one weakness or two weaknesses within the set of skills. It's just an area where the person needs a little extra training, a little extra development to plug the gap, to fix that small weakness. And that will make, in a sense, that person complete in terms of competencies in the task in which they find themselves. So it's worthwhile the organisation identifying where weaknesses exist and then trying to rectify those. The effective use of training and development. If training is focused on required competencies, it's important that the training deals with competencies. It's important that the training identifies what competencies are required and then tries to fix them. For example, in an organization, the more generic competencies we mentioned earlier, now these can be dealt with across the organization. So there could be a very mixed group of people coming together for a training session, perhaps from production, accountancy, from marketing, from different departments may appear for that particular session, because they're generic. These apply to everyone. They all should be expected to be able to work in teams and work in groups and have good communication skills and be affable and polite and well-mannered and so on and so on. So these are competencies that go right across the organization. So these are general and could be general sessions. But sometimes competencies have to be more specific. They may be within the production section or the marketing section. So it's a very tightly controlled development and training session, looking at specific competencies that are needed for that particular function. Clearly, a continuous framework for training and development is what's required, and it must be well thought out and well delivered. Performance management will clearly define competencies, make it easier to monitor and measure and reward performance. When the company knows exactly what competencies are required and then sees employees meeting those competencies, then that's a good sign. That is good performance. The requirements of a particular task should be realistic. They should be attainable. It would be wrong for management to set tasks that are simply impossible for humans to complete. Unrealistic. So there must be a realism in setting tasks, and then looking at the competencies that people have in trying to attain those tasks, trying to meet the tasks, trying to meet the requirements of the task. But if they do meet the requirements of the task, that is good performance, and that could be rewarded. So performance appraisals, perhaps a meeting every month or every year or every 6 months or whatever, performance appraisals is when managers meet the employees, discuss how the work has gone, what issues have arisen, and listen carefully to the employees. This is not the management telling the employees what to do. This is the management listening to the employees and asking questions that are aimed at supporting the employee, looking at what competencies need to be addressed and promoted and developed, and making a note of these and trying to get some training in place so that the employee is better able to complete the tasks required. So it's important for the management to set clear and specific goals for employees, ones that are achievable and ones that the employees have the competencies to do. When there are weaknesses, they put in place some measures to deal with that. Career paths. Well, competencies, knowledge, skills and knowledge required for long-term career progression. So if we take these as competencies, knowledge, skills and the knowledge required for long-term career progression, this is what adds up to the career path. The career path are people acquiring competencies, acquiring skills, but they're also acquiring, they're acknowledging what skills are required. They're recognizing what skills are required, but they're also acquiring some knowledge behind it to understand why those skills work and what is required by the skills, and a deeper understanding perhaps of their own skills and their own competencies. And when they've got that, they are well on their way to a career path, to using those competencies. So in a sense, career paths are determined by people's competencies. If people can perform particular functions, that's where their career path is most likely going to take them. Benchmarks are set to enable employees to achieve progression. It's always the case that there's room for improvement. So employees looking at their own competencies may set themselves higher standards and try to achieve the next level up. That's a part of the human condition. We always want more, but sometimes people are ambitious. They want to prove that they can do extra. They can do something better than everyone else. So they're trying to set themselves higher benchmarks, trying to jump up to a higher level. And organizations may facilitate this through training and development. And with a performance appraisal, they may be able to agree with the employee what their future is or where it could be if they attain certain standards. So there's extra motivation on the part of the employee to try and meet those additional requirements. Eliminate any bias towards employees. Employees must meet criteria in order to progress along the career path. So career paths should be quite objective. It's not a question of the employer merely dismissing people as not capable, or some people as capable, but perhaps their personalities don't agree or whatever. In fact, the organisation should be looking for efficiency and competency. And whilst the generic competencies of being affable and polite and so on, those apply, there may be still issues surrounding relationships within the organisation. But sometimes a third party can help resolve those. For example, if a manager has a problem with a certain employee, perhaps it's just a personality clash, perhaps the HR section can help in resolving the issue, or discussing with both of them, or bringing them together to discuss the issue, so that there is a more amicable way of working. So these are some of the issues surrounding competencies that I think we should take into account. It's an important area in today's work. It's one which was somehow overlooked, or its significance perhaps was overlooked, in preference to more academic development in the past. But now we recognise that competencies are important, and there is a real issue in trying to develop these and finding ways in which to develop them effectively. In the UK, there are certificates and assessments that can go with specific competency development, and other countries are introducing similar qualifications. But that's all we're going to deal with in this session, dealing on competency. So thank you for watching.